My wife invited me to a hotel. She wasn't alone. She smirked, signed the house over. Her lover sat in my chair. You're transferring everything, he said, or we ruin you. 2 days later, his smile faded. My wife went silent. He looked at me. What did you do? But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The pine trees outside Broken Bow held no secrets. They stood straight and silent the way they always had, rooted deep in red Oklahoma soil, indifferent to the lives that moved beneath them. The lake caught the afternoon sun and scattered it across the water in flat silver pieces. Somewhere down the road, a screen door banged shut. A dog barked twice and went quiet. Colton Rains sat in his truck in the parking lot of Bowen's Hardware and read the text message one more time. Meet me at Timberline Lodge, room 212. We need to talk. He set the phone face down on the passenger seat. He looked at his hands. The knuckles were rough, stained faintly with gear oil that never fully came out no matter how hard he scrubbed. He had been using those hands since he was 17 years old, working on farm equipment in the summer heat, learning by doing, never once asking anyone to carry him. He had built a life from scratch, a house on a quiet road with a good well, and a workshop out back where he spent his evenings in peace. He started the truck and pulled out of the lot. He already knew what room 212 was going to look like before he got there. Colton had known for 6 months. It started on a Tuesday in March, the kind of evening that arrives quietly and changes everything. He had come home early from a job, a broken track assembly on a crawler crane out near Eagletown, because the replacement part hadn't arrived and there was nothing left to do. The house was still. Tessa's car was in the driveway, which surprised him because she had told him she would be at her sister's place in Idable. He didn't call out when he came through the door. He was tired. He set his boots by the entry mat and walked into the kitchen to get water. That was when he noticed her gym bag on the counter, unzipped, and the edge of a second phone visible between a folded towel and a water bottle. He stood there for a long moment. He picked it up. The screen lit with a message notification from a contact saved only as a letter, D. He read it. Then he read back through the thread. Colton had always been the kind of man who felt things fully and showed them slowly. He did not rage. He did not break dishes. He stood at the kitchen counter and read every message in that phone while the refrigerator hummed and a truck passed on the highway outside. And by the time he set the phone back in the bag exactly the way he found it, he had already decided what he was going to do. He was not going to say a word. The messages told him everything he needed to know about both of them. Tessa and Derek Lott, a name Colton vaguely recognized from the lake crowd, a man who showed up at cookouts with a loud voice and a habit of making other men feel small. 41 years old, twice divorced. He had assault charges from a decade back, probation that had dragged on, and a child he owed support for and resented openly. Colton knew the type. Men who believed that wanting something hard enough made them entitled to it. The texts were not love letters. There was no tenderness in them. They were transactional, low, and increasingly focused on one subject, the house. He owes you. Get the house. Make him transfer it. Clean break. You put years into that place. It's yours. We can use what we have on him. Trust me. Colton set the phone down. He walked to the kitchen sink and drank a full glass of water. He dried his hands on the dish towel. He never confronted Tessa that evening. He made dinner. They ate together. She talked about something she had seen on television. He listened and nodded in the right places. And that night, lying in the dark, Colton began a plan. The months that followed were the longest of his life, but not in the way most people would imagine. He was not consumed by jealousy. He was not gutted with grief. He had loved Tessa once. That was real, and it cost him something to let go of it. But what replaced love in those months was a cold, focused clarity. He had a problem to solve. He intended to solve it correctly. He started with what he knew. He pulled every financial record he could access. He checked their joint accounts, credit reports, loan balances. He was thorough about it the way he was thorough about everything. The way you had to be when you were diagnosing an engine problem that made no sense on the surface, but was always something specific if you looked carefully enough. What he found made his jaw tighten. 3 credit card accounts. all opened digitally, all using his social security number. The balances were not small. The spending had started 8 months ago, before he had even found a second phone, and the charges pointed everywhere that Derek Lott's life was expensive. Restaurants in Dallas, a weekend at a resort in Hot Springs, electronics, gas stations along I-35. Derek had told her to do it. Colton had screenshots of that too. In one of the messages, Derek laid it out plainly. Use his number. He won't check. And even if he does, you're married. They can't prove anything. Colton printed everything. He organized it in a manila folder in the locked drawer of his workshop desk. He did not touch it again for 3 weeks. Then he made a phone call to his attorney, a quiet woman named Elaine who had an office on Main Street and who had known Colton's family for years. He explained the situation without emotion. She listened. When he finished, she said, "You're going to need to be very careful about the order of operations here." "I know," he said, "and you can't tip them off." "I won't." He refinanced the house. It was not complicated. The mortgage was in good standing, his credit was strong, and with the right paperwork it moved cleanly. He made sure every piece of it was in order and documented. The house became his own. He filed the new deed. He did not tell Tessa. Then he bought a small digital recorder and put it in his shirt pocket. He waited. The text came on a Wednesday. "Meet me at Timberline Lodge. Room 212. We need to talk." Colton read it, set the phone down, and finished the bolt he was tightening on a Cat 320 excavator bucket. He cleaned his tools. He washed up. He drove home and changed into a clean pair of jeans and a plain gray shirt. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. His face was unremarkable in the way that honest faces often are, weathered, wide at the jaw, dark eyes that held whatever they felt without advertising it. He was not a man who looked like trouble. He had always counted on that. He pressed the record button on the small device and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Then he drove to the Timberline Lodge. The lodge sat at the edge of a tree line off Highway 259, a 2-story structure built from cedar and stone that tried to look rustic and mostly succeeded. The parking lot held a dozen vehicles. Colton recognized Tessa's silver SUV parked near the far end. A blue pickup he didn't know, Derek's, sat 2 spots down. He sat in his truck for exactly 2 minutes. Not because he was afraid. He simply wanted to arrive with no excess inside him. No anger, no hope, no nerves. He wanted to walk through that door emptied of everything except attention. He got out of the truck. The evening air smelled like pine sap and distant water. The lake was maybe half a mile through the trees. A pair of guests walked past the parking lot carrying fishing rods, laughing about something, their voices fading as they turned the corner. Normal evening. Normal town. People going about their lives. Colton climbed the outside stairs to the second floor and walked down the corridor. The carpet was dark green, the kind that absorbed footsteps. He found 212 near the end of the hall and knocked twice. Tessa opened the door. She was wearing a button-up blouse, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment and was trying to remember her lines. She stepped back from the doorway and let him in. Derek was sitting in an armchair near the foot of the bed. His boots were on, heavy-sole work boots that had never seen a work site, and his arms were crossed over his chest. He had a broad face and a thin layer of stubble kept deliberately short, and he was the kind of man who sat with his knees wide apart as though he were claiming the room. He looked at Colton and smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that was meant to tell you where you stood. Tessa moved to stand near the window with the curtains drawn behind her. She did not look at Colton directly. She was looking at the floor, then at the wall, then at a point somewhere between them. "Close the door," she said. Colton closed it. He stood just inside the room. He did not move toward the chairs. He did not sit on the bed. He stood where he was and looked at his wife. She lifted her chin. Something in her posture shifted, stiffened, like she was stepping into a role she had been rehearsing but wasn't fully sure she had right. "We're done pretending," she said. Her voice came out flat and rehearsed, and he could hear Derek's influence in it. That bluntness was not natural to her. She had learned it from someone. Colton said nothing. Derek unfolded his arms and leaned forward in the chair. "Here's how this goes," he said. "Simple. Clean. You sign the house over to her. Voluntary transfer. We move on. Everybody walks away. And if I don't? Derek smiled wider. Then we post everything. Videos, messages, whatever we've got. He paused. And we'll tell people you were unstable, that you threatened her, that she was scared. Colton looked at Tessa. For just a moment, she met his eyes. Then she looked away. The videos, Colton said. The messages. He said it slowly, the way you repeat something to make sure you have heard it correctly, not because you were surprised. You know what I mean, Derek said. I want to make sure I understand. Colton's voice was even. He took a small half step and set his hand on the edge of the table near the door. Beneath his palm, out of sight, he adjusted his shirt pocket slightly. So you're saying, if I don't sign over the house, you'll make claims about me? Derek tilted his head. That's what I said. Say it again. Derek frowned. The smile faded at the edges. What? Say it again. So I understand exactly. Derek glanced at Tessa, then back at Colton. He was trying to figure out if there was something wrong in the room, and he wasn't finding it. He saw a calm man with his hand on a table. He saw nothing to worry about. You give her the house, Derek said. Voluntarily. Or we ruin you. Simple as that. Colton nodded slowly. Okay, he said. That one word sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Derek blinked. He had expected resistance. He had expected anger. He had maybe expected begging. He had not expected okay, delivering the same tone a man uses when someone tells him the weather. Tessa looked up. Derek recovered. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from the inside pocket of his jacket and held it out. Sign at the bottom. Date it. Colton picked up the paper. He took his time reading it. His eyes moved down the page without rushing. Read it aloud, he said. Derek stared at him. Are you serious? I need to be sure about what I'm signing. Derek took the paper back with a short exhale of irritation. He skimmed it. You voluntarily transfer your half of the marital home. He looked up. That's it. You happy? And if I refuse? Derek's jaw set. I already told you. We have what we need to make your life miserable. You want to fight us on this? You're going to spend the next 2 years in court with your reputation in pieces. He leaned back. Sign it, and you keep your dignity. Colton picked up the pen from the table. He looked at the paper. He looked at Tessa, who was watching him now with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between satisfaction and the beginning of unease. He signed. He dated it. He set the pen down and picked up the paper and held it for a moment, then handed it back to Derek. There you go, Colton said. Derek took it and folded it without looking at it again. Colton walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. He paused. Take care of yourselves, he said. He walked out. He went down the stairs and through the parking lot and got into his truck. He sat there for a moment with the engine off. Through the windshield, the trees were dark shapes against the fading sky. He reached into his shirt pocket and pressed stop on the recorder. He drove home. The next morning, Colton was up before 5. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house with a manila folder open in front of him. The recorder sat on the corner of the table. He had listened to the playback twice already. The audio was clean. Derek's voice was clear. Every word. He had a 7:30 appointment with Elaine. He showered, dressed, and was at her office 10 minutes early. He laid everything out on her desk, in order. The printed text messages, the credit card statements, the screenshots from the second phone, and the recorder beside all of it. Elaine listened to the recording without speaking. When it ended, she set her glasses on the table and looked at him. You understand what you have here, she said. I think so. This is extortion. Clear, documented on tape. She tapped the recorder. His voice, his words, his specific threat tied to a specific demand. She looked at the financial records. And the identity fraud is federal. She signed digitally. It's timestamped. Elaine nodded slowly. Colton, I want to be straight with you. Once you file this, there is no stepping back. This becomes a criminal matter. He met her eyes. I know. And Tessa. She made her choices, he said. His voice did not waver. Elaine held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and reached for a notepad. They spent 2 hours putting everything in order. The reports were filed that afternoon. One with the county sheriff's office, one with the state attorney's office that handled financial crimes. The identity fraud component triggered a federal flag within 24 hours. Colton went home and fixed the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for 3 weeks. He made dinner. He slept without difficulty. 2 days after the hotel room, there was a knock on Derek Lott's apartment door. He lived in a complex on the south side of town, a two-story building painted beige, with a parking lot full of older trucks and a dumpster that was always slightly overfull. He was in the middle of eating cereal at his kitchen counter when he heard the knock. He figured it was his neighbor asking to borrow something again. He opened the door. 2 officers from the county sheriff's department stood on the landing. One of them was holding a folder. Derek Lott. He looked at them. Something in his stomach dropped, but he kept his face easy. Yeah, we need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed. Identity fraud and extortion. The word extortion hit him in the chest like a fist. He put one hand on the doorframe. I don't know what you're talking about. The officer with the folder opened it and showed him the first page. It was a printed transcript of the hotel room recording. Derek went very still. We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions, the officer said. He came. That evening, Derek found Tessa in the parking lot of the small apartment she had been renting since she and Colton had separated their daily lives. She had stopped sleeping at the house 2 months earlier. He pulled up behind her car as she was walking to her door and got out fast. She turned around. He looked terrible. His face was tight, his movements jerky in the way people move when they're operating on pure adrenaline and very little thought. What did you tell him? He demanded. He was not quite shouting, but his voice carried. Tessa looked at him with wide eyes. I didn't tell him anything. What happened? They came to my door. The police. He stepped closer. They had a recording. Tessa, the colors shifted in her face. Not all at once, but in a way that was visible, the warmth draining out of it slowly. A recording. From the hotel room. From that night. He put both hands up and then let them drop. He said he was dumb. He said he would just sign and walk away. I thought he would. Well, he didn't. Derek's voice cracked. They're saying fraud. Federal fraud. Do you know what that means for me? She shook her head, stepping back slightly. You told me it was fine. You told me it was only illegal if... I know what I told you. He put his hand flat against the dashboard of her car. The sound was sharp. A light came on in an apartment window across the lot. This is a problem. This is a real problem. What do we do? He looked at her with something that was not quite contempt and not quite desperation, but lived somewhere between them. I don't know yet, he said, but need to figure out what story you're going to tell. He got back in his truck. He drove away without looking at her. She stood alone in the parking lot in the growing dark. From a balcony on the second floor, an older woman named Patricia, who had lived in that complex for 11 years and knew everyone's business and nobody's secrets, watched the whole thing with her arms folded. Broken Bow was small. Patricia had a nephew who knew the sheriff. Nothing stayed quiet in a town this size. Tessa went inside and sat on her couch without turning on the lights. She sat in the dark for a long time. She had met Derek Lott 14 months ago at a lake party thrown by mutual friends. He was louder than Colton, more immediately present, the kind of man who filled a room with sound and movement and made it feel like something was always about to happen. At the time, she had told herself that was what she wanted: energy, spontaneity, something different from the steady, quiet life that had come to feel like standing water. She had been wrong about what that meant. She saw it more clearly now, sitting in her dark apartment with her hands in her lap, than she had in the entire 14 months she had been making decisions based on it. Derek had never loved her. He had needed something from her, a solution to a financial problem, a warm body, a person willing to take risks he could direct from a safe distance. She had not seen it, or she had seen it and told herself it was something else. She pressed her palms against her knees. The credit cards. She had known when she was doing it that something was wrong. The wrongness of it had been present, a low hum beneath everything. But Derek had explained it away so easily, so quickly, the way he explained everything. Fast, confident, with just enough logic to quiet the concern before she could hold it long enough to examine it. It's only illegal if someone reports it. She had let herself believe that was an answer. She closed her eyes. The next morning, Derek packed a bag. He moved fast and without plan, which was how he had always moved when he was scared, though he would never have named it as fear. He called it thinking on his feet. He had always been a man who believed that momentum was the same thing as control. He had a friend in San Antonio. He had driven down to Texas before. He could lay low, figure out the angles, let things cool. The fraud charge, that was Tessa's mess. Her name was on the applications. Her signature. He had told her what to do, but he had not put the pen in her hand. She could deal with it. He would deal with his own angle. He threw his duffel in the back seat, locked his apartment, and drove south on Highway 259 toward the state line. He did not answer Tessa's calls. There were 4 of them before he turned his phone to silent. He watched the pine trees give way to flatter, drier country as he crossed into Texas. He turned the radio up. He was doing almost 90 when the highway patrol unit pulled out behind him. The lights came on. Derek checked his mirror. His hands tightened on the wheel. He pulled over with the careful deliberateness of a man trying to perform innocence. The officer came to the window, ran his plates, came back with a different expression than he had left with. There was a warrant. Colton had moved faster than Derek had calculated. The warrant had been processed the previous afternoon. Identity theft charges, conspiracy, extortion. It had been flagged and shared with neighboring jurisdictions within hours. Derek sat behind the wheel on the shoulder of a Texas highway with the wind off the flatlands moving through the window and the officer's hand resting on the door, and he did not fight it. He was not a man who fought things that were already finished. He got out of the car. He put his hands behind his back. He did not say anything. The county interrogation room smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. The walls were the pale yellow of something that had started out white and given up. A single light above the table made everything slightly too bright, the kind of brightness that made you aware of every line in your own face. Tessa sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her. She had not slept. There were marks beneath her eyes that makeup had not covered well, and her hands trembled slightly against the table's surface. She kept pressing them flat to stop it. Detective Howard, a steady, gray-haired man who spoke in the careful, unhurried way of someone who had been doing this work for a long time, set a stack of printed bank statements on the table in front of her. He sat down across from her. He looked at her the way people look at something they understand completely and find neither surprising nor satisfying. "Walk me through the account openings," he said. Tessa looked at the papers. The account numbers were highlighted in yellow. "I can explain." "Please do." She had come up with a version of events during the long, sleepless night. It was not a good version. She knew it wasn't good, but she hadn't been able to build a better one, and she had to say something. "He knew about them," she said. "My husband knew. We talked about it. It was for joint expenses." Howard's face did not change. He reported them, he said. Just those 3 words. Something shifted inside her chest. A kind of dropping sensation like stepping off a curb you didn't see. He filed the report himself. Provided documentation. Howard turned one of the pages toward her. "This is a screenshot of a conversation between you and the co-defendant, in which he advises you to use your husband's social security number and tells you your husband will not check." He tapped the page. "Your response is visible here. You agreed." She stared at the page. "That's taken out of context," she said. Her voice was smaller than she intended. Howard folded his hands. "Ms. Raines, the charges are financial fraud and forgery. The federal component relates to the use of another person's identifying information to open lines of credit." He paused. "These are serious matters. If you have something to tell us about how you came to make these decisions, now would be the right time." She opened her mouth. "Closed it. He made me do it," she said finally. It came out quietly, almost a plea. Howard looked at her without any particular expression. "That's something your attorney will need to take up with the court," he said. He gathered the papers back into his folder and stood up. She sat in the room alone after he left and stared at the yellow walls. She had imagined this going 100 ways, and none of them had looked like this. None of them had included Colton already being 10 steps ahead. She had called him cold for years. She had said it to Derek, said it to her friends, said it to herself as justification. "He's cold. He's distant. He doesn't feel things the way I need him to." She had believed that. She had needed to believe it. But cold men don't plan like this. Cold men don't wait like this. Cold men don't document everything in file reports and move their names onto deeds and refinance mortgages and sit quietly across the table from 2 people trying to steal from them and say okay, because they already know that okay means nothing. She pressed her hands over her face. Colton heard about the arrest from Elaine, who heard it from the sheriff's department directly. He was under a John Deere 670G motor grader at the time, working on a seal that had been leaking since the previous Friday. His phone buzzed on the toolbox beside the vehicle. He slid out from under it and looked at the screen. Elaine's message was short. Warrant executed. He's in custody in Texas. Extradition pending. He set the phone down. He slid back under the grader. He finished the seal. The request to see Tessa came from her attorney, a woman named Dana who had taken the case on short notice and who called Elaine twice before Elaine called Colton. She's requesting a brief meeting with you before the formal charges are scheduled. Colton was quiet on the phone for a moment. What does she want? He said. I believe she wants to explain herself. Another pause. When? He said. Tomorrow morning. The facility allows a 15-minute visit. He looked out the window of his workshop at the backyard, at the woodpile he had been meaning to res-tack, at the big pine that his father had helped him plant 20 years ago that now rose higher than the roofline. I'll be there, he said. He drove to the county facility the next morning under a sky the color of old iron, the kind of heavy gray that came before November cold. The leaves on the oaks were going amber and rust. The air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. He signed in at the front desk and waited in a plastic chair in the corridor. He had not brought anything with him. His hands rested on his knees. He sat in the stillness the way he always sat in stillness. Not restless, not tense, but very much awake. A guard led him through 2 sets of doors. The visiting room was divided by a low partition. Not glass, just a table with a barrier down the middle, the kind of room used for pretrial visits. There were 2 other conversations happening at other spots along the table, voices low. Tessa was already seated. She looked smaller. He had known her for 17 years. He had known her when she was 22 years old, laughing in the parking lot of a football game, her hair loose in the October wind. He had known her when she was afraid, and when she was brave, and when she was something in between. He had thought he would know her always, the way you think that about people before you learn what they are capable of. She was wearing a jail-issued jumpsuit, and she had no makeup on, and her hair was pulled back simply. She looked, in a strange way, more like herself than she had in a long time. She looked at him. He sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You set me up." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not accusing, something more complicated than accusing. Searching for the shape of what had happened. Colton looked at her. "No," he said. "I'll let you keep going." She exhaled through her nose. Her eyes went wet. She looked at the partition. "I didn't want this," she said. He waited. "Wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be." She stopped. Started again. "He told me it would be clean, that you would just accept it. And you believed him. It wasn't a question." She heard the weight of it anyway. "He made me believe him," she said. "He's good at that." Colton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He recognized the move. The shift away from personal responsibility, the search for an external cause, the hope that if she could make the blame land somewhere other than herself, it would be easier to carry. He had expected it. He did not offer her the comfort she was reaching for. "He made you open credit cards in my name," Colton said quietly. "He made you sit in that hotel room and threaten to destroy my reputation. He made you do all of that. I know how it sounds. I think you made choices," he said, "and I think you made them knowing what they were." She pressed her lips together. A tear moved down one cheek, and she wiped it with the back of her hand in a quick, almost angry motion. "We were unhappy," she said. It came out like something she had held onto, a last piece of justification. "You have to admit that. We weren't. Being unhappy doesn't make you a criminal." The words landed clean and flat. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. She looked at him for a long time. He held her gaze without softening it. He thought about the boy he had been at 23, pouring a concrete foundation by hand in July heat because he couldn't afford to hire it out, because he was going to build something solid if it took everything he had. He thought about every Sunday morning he had brought her coffee in bed. Every winter he had kept the pipes from freezing and the driveway cleared. Every quiet evening at the lake, the 2 of them on the dock with the water going still and pink in the setting sun. He let all of it pass through him. He stood up. She said his name. Just once. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he walked out. He He did not look back through the window. He did not stop at the door. He moved the way he had always moved, steadily and without hesitation, with the particular economy of a man who has made his decision and has nothing left to negotiate with himself about. The guard led him through the first door. He walked to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat and looked out at the facility's small parking lot, at the chain-link fence along the perimeter, at the thin line of trees beyond it. He started the engine. He drove home. The courthouse in McCurtain County was a brick building set back from the main road with a row of aging elms in front of it that had survived several storms and showed it in the way their branches grew. Irregular, reaching in different directions, but rooted and standing. Colton attended the arraignment hearings because Elaine had told him his presence mattered and because he believed in finishing things. He sat in the gallery and watched. Derek came in first, accompanied by a public defender, a young man who looked as though he had been given this case at the last possible moment and was still reading through the file. Derek walked with his chin forward and his eyes moving around the room. And when he passed the gallery, he spotted Colton and held his gaze for 2 seconds before looking away. Colton didn't shift in his seat. He just watched. Derek's charges were read: conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, extortion. The judge was a woman named Carmichael who had been on the bench for 22 years and who read the charges the way a doctor reads a chart, without drama, with complete attention. When the prosecutor played a portion of the hotel room, recording in open court, Derek's attorney tried to object on procedural grounds. The judge overruled him without looking up from her notes. Derek's voice came through the courtroom's audio system, clear as a conversation happening in real time. You give her the house, voluntarily, or we ruin you. Simple as that. Colton sat with his hands folded in his lap. The defense had tried to suggest that the recording had been obtained improperly. Elaine had handled this before Colton ever arrived at that hotel room. Oklahoma law permitted recording of a conversation by a party to that conversation. Colton had been a party. There was nothing to challenge. Derek tried a different angle. He told his attorney to imply that Tessa had been the instigator, that he was a passenger in her scheme, following her lead. His attorney presented this argument with as much conviction as the circumstances allowed. In the second hearing, Tessa's attorney presented almost the exact inverse version. Tessa had been manipulated, coerced. She had feared Derek. She had not understood the legal consequences. The judge listened to both arguments. Neither was persuasive. The text messages were extensive, time-stamped, and explicit. The financial records were documented. The recording was unambiguous. The evidence did not leave room for elaborate alternative explanations. Derek received a sentence of 4 years on the combined charges, reduced from a potential 7 based on his attorney's work and the absence of a prior fraud conviction, though the assault record from a decade back was noted and did not help him. Tessa received 2 years, with eligibility for early release under specific conditions. She had cooperated partially with investigators, which her attorney argued in mitigation. The judge accepted the argument to a limited degree. Both of them tried, in their separate hearings, to blame the other. Neither of them mentioned, with any apparent clarity, that none of it had been necessary, that a man they had underestimated had simply decided not to be defeated and had gone about ensuring it with patience and precision. Broken Bow had its share of drama. Every small town does, but the story of the Raines case spread through it with particular speed and particular attention to detail. People at the diner on Main Street talked about it. Men at the bait shop on the Lake Road talked about it. Wives mentioned it at book club. The hardware store owner had known Colton since he was 12 years old and told anyone who came through the door that he had always known that boy was sharper than he looked. A few people shook their heads at Tessa. A few expressed something like sympathy before catching themselves. Most of them came around to the same feeling, which was that it had been handled right, not with fury and spectacle, but with evidence and process, the way a serious person handles a serious wrong. Nobody said much to Colton about it directly. People in Broken Bow understood the difference between respecting someone and making a show of it. A couple of neighbors left casseroles on his porch without notes. He ate them and thought they were good and never mentioned it to anyone. The legal process took time to settle. Hearings, filings, appeals on minor procedural points, the slow administrative machinery of the court system moving at its own pace. Elaine managed most of it. Colton checked in with her every week and otherwise went about his life. He replaced the water heater in November. He rebuilt the steps on the back porch, which had been creaking for 2 years. He winterized the workshop properly this time, adding insulation along the north wall that made a real difference when January arrived with its hard freezes. He worked. He had always worked. That had never been in question. But there was something different about working now, something lighter. He moved through his days without the low, constant pressure he had not fully noticed until it was gone. He had carried the knowledge of Tessa's betrayal for 6 months while still sharing the same world with her. And the weight of that, it turned out, had been considerable. It was gone now. The house was his. The credit issues were being resolved. Elaine had worked with the financial institutions involved, and between the fraud documentation and the criminal charges, the illegitimate accounts were in the process of being cleared from his record entirely. His credit score, which had dropped when the accounts were opened, would recover fully. He did not feel triumphant about any of it. He did not feel the need to. He had done what needed to be done. That was all. Spring came to Broken Bow the way it always did, gradually at first, and then all at once, the kind of transformation that sneaks up on you until one morning you walk outside and the air is warm and smells green and you realize that the hard season is over. Colton found the old aluminum fishing boat behind his workshop on a Saturday morning in April. He had bought it from an estate sale 3 years earlier with the intention of fixing it up and had gotten to it intermittently, and then not at all. It sat on a low trailer with flat tires, the hull dull and pitted in places. One of the bench seats cracked along one edge. He stood and looked at it for a while. Then he got his tools. He spent 2 weekends on the hull, sanding it down, treating the metal, applying a proper sealant. He replaced the bench seat. He put air in the trailer tires and replaced the one that had a slow leak. He sourced a second-hand outboard motor from a man in Broken Bow who was clearing out a storage unit and got it running properly with a couple of hours of patient attention. His neighbor Wade came by one Saturday afternoon and leaned on the fence watching. Wade was in his 50s, a retired electrician, and he had a habit of showing up precisely when something worth watching was happening. "Looking good," Wade said. Getting there, Colton said. He was sitting on a stool beside the boat, working on the motor mounting bracket. Wade was quiet for a while. He watched Colton work. Then he said, "You know, my wife heard about the whole thing. From the Hendersons. I figured. She said she felt sorry for Tessa." Colton glanced up. Wade shook his head quickly. "I told her to keep that to herself." Colton almost smiled. He went back to the bracket. Wade leaned on the fence a while longer. He picked up a leaf from the ground and turned it between his fingers. Then he said, in the way a person says something they've been holding for a while, "How do you keep so calm through all of it?" Colton set down his wrench. He looked out past the workshop at the tree line at the edge of the property, where the pines ran thick and the ground stayed soft even in dry weather. The lake was a mile through those trees. He knew every road that got there. When someone thinks you're weak, he said, you let them. He picked the wrench back up, and you document everything. Wade stood there a moment. Then he nodded slowly, like something had just confirmed itself. "You want coffee?" he said. "After I finish this," Colton said. On a Sunday in late April, Colton loaded the boat onto the trailer and drove it down to the public ramp at Broken Bow Lake. He backed it in. He got it floating. He stepped aboard and pulled the motor cord, and it started on the third pull, which was honestly about as good as you could hope for with a second-hand outboard. He moved out across the water. The lake was wide and still and catching the morning sun from low angles, breaking it into bright points that moved across the surface. A great blue heron stood in the shallows near the tree line on the far bank, absolutely still, waiting. Colton cut the motor and let the boat drift. The silence was complete in the particular way of outdoor silence. Not the absence of sound, but a presence of it. The insects and birds and the small movement of water against the aluminum hull, all of it creating something that felt like actual quiet rather than just the lack of noise. He thought about his father, who had taught him to fish on this lake when he was 7 years old. His father had been a patient, mostly silent man who communicated most things through example. He had not taught Colton to fight. He had taught him to wait, to watch, to understand what was actually happening before responding to it. Don't let your mouth move before your mind does, he used to say. Colton had not always done that, but he had learned it. He picked up the fishing rod he had brought and set a line. He was in no hurry. Tessa served her time in a facility 40 minutes outside of town. She was released after 14 months under an early release program, having met all conditions. She did not return a broken bow. Her sister and Idable came to pick her up and drove her back, and as far as anyone in town knew or said, that was where she settled. Whether she made anything better of herself after that, Colton did not know. He did not seek the information. He wished her no particular ill. She had enough of her own, and he held no particular hope for her either. She had become, in his mind, something like a problem that had been correctly solved. The solution held. There was no need to revisit it. Derek served more of his sentence than Tessa and was released eventually to a different state. He had family in Missouri. Nobody in Broken Bow heard from him. Nobody expected to. Summer settled onto the town the way it always did, thick and green and alive with the sound of boats on the lake and children on the roads. Colton worked steadily through June and July. There was good work to be had. The construction season kept equipment moving and breaking down and needing repair, and his reputation, if anything, had strengthened through everything that had happened. He had a waiting list by July, which he had never had before. He had dinner with Wade and Wade's wife, Carolyn, a few times through the summer. He drove to Idable to see his own sister and her family. He took the boat out early on Sunday mornings when the water was flat. He was not unhappy. He was not performing happiness either. He simply was, in the plainest sense, a man living his life cleanly and without damage, working and resting and moving through the seasons of Broken Bow the way he always had, the way his father had, the way the pines and the lake did, without apology, without explanation, without asking permission from anyone. He had built everything himself. He intended to keep it. In the fall, when the maples on the State Park Road had gone red and the air had that particular edge to it that meant the first real cold was close, Colton drove to the hardware store and picked up a new set of files for his workshop. He stopped for coffee at the diner on the way back. The woman at the counter, a young woman named Bree who had worked there since high school and knew everyone by name and order, set his coffee in front of him without being asked and said, "Heard you got that old boat running." "I did," Colton said. "Catch anything?" "A couple of crappie." Threw them back. She laughed. "Why bother catching them then?" He thought about it. "Because you can," he said. She laughed again and moved to the other end of the counter. He sat with his coffee and looked out the window at Main Street in the morning. A pickup pulled into the hardware store lot. Two kids on bikes rode past. An old couple crossed the street in no particular hurry. Broken Bow on an October morning. Just the town. Just the people. Just the ordinary, decent weight of a place where you knew who you were and what you had and what it had cost you. Colton drank his coffee. He paid and left a proper tip. He drove home. Two people sat in separate facilities staring at walls that had not changed since the day they arrived. They had walked into a hotel room in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, believing they had every advantage. They had a plan, leverage, and a target they had convinced themselves was slow and simple and easy. They had been wrong about all of it. Colton Rains had not won by fighting. He had won by watching, by letting them believe, for exactly as long as it took, that they were in control. He had given them enough space to build their own case against themselves, and then he had handed that case to the people whose job it was to act on it. He had not needed to be cruel. He had not needed to be loud. He had needed to be patient and careful and correct. He was all three. The house stood on its quiet road south of town. The workshop light came on in the evening. The lake moved in the mornings the way it always had. Everything that was his remained his. He had made sure of it.